Hi there, and thank you so much for joining me again. Today, I have 1010music's Bento on the desk, and I want to share a few of my first impressions after having played around with it for a couple of weeks now. Please bear in mind, this is not the official or final review. I'll be doing that in a few months from now when I really feel I know my way around it comfortably. Instead, I want to share my initial experience learning it and tell you what has stood out to me about it, as well as a fair share of gripes I've had with it so far. Now, before we start, please know that 1010music sent Bento over for me to try out, but no money changed hands. They have no say over the contents of this video, nor do they get to see it before you do. So let's get started. The Bento has been kind of a weird journey for me up until this point. The device seems to be a strange mixture of great sound design possibilities and very fun looping tools and cool hardware features, coupled with some peculiar UI decisions and a firmware that still seems to be finding its footing. So let's start with what I like about the Bento. On the hardware side of things, I love that it has an easily readable, high quality, full color touchscreen. I also like that it has a bunch of context sensitive rotary knobs on the top, and the pads are surprisingly sensitive and have a very nice feel to them, which makes finger drumming and key playing on it very enjoyable. Also, for a device this size, it has a remarkable amount of connectivity, featuring 2 MIDI ins and outs, 3 audio ins and outs, as well as 2 USB-C ports and a micro SD card slot. The screen, though touch sensitive, doesn't allow for everything to be done with touch. For example, in the mixer screen, you can select a track with a touch screen, but you can't adjust its level using touch. You can only do that with a knob. On the slicer screen, you can zoom in and out by pinching the screen, but you can't touch to select a slice. You have to use a knob. For a device that is primarily sample-based, the sound design capabilities of the Bento actually took me by surprise. You have a variety of sound engines to choose from. You get a wavetable and granular engine that are 1010's own Fireball and Lemon Drop synths, a very good multi-sampler with auto-sampling capabilities, and you can also play around with loops and one-shots. Especially in the granular synth, the amount of tools at your disposal are pretty amazing. Especially since it has 2 waveforms to work on and individually tweak. Both waveforms have individual filters and envelopes, and this engine features a mod sequencer and 2 LFOs. There is a trade-off to all that power though. You can only use 1 granular synth engine per project. Which, considering all it can do, I still think is pretty fair. Each track has its own mod matrix as well, which, aside from being quite powerful, manages to be pretty straightforward and easy to understand, and can help you turn the simplest of samples into endlessly evolving soundscapes. The looper and one-shot tracks, which occupy only 1 of the 8 instrument slots, actually treat each one of the loops as separate items with their own individual parameters, filters, LFOs, etc. For example, let's tweak out this hats loop to something unrecognizable. Again, there is a trade-off. You can't sequence multiple loops within a track to launch within a scene. You have to trigger them manually. Okay, so this is a loop track, and each one of these boxes is a loop, so I can trigger them. And that's really fun. Actually, it's one of my favorite parts of the device. The thing is, I can only sequence or set the song to trigger one of these. So for example, let's say I have all of these playing at the same time, right? If I go into my song and I launch this clip over here, they'll stop playing. Again, let's sequence over here. They stop playing. The bottom row is a bit different. Here, if I have them launched and I launch another scene, they'll still play. So basically in song mode, with each scene, you can only set one of the top rows to launch, and whatever you have playing on the bottom will just carry on to the next scene, but you can't actually sequence them to go on and off. Kind of a bummer. Triggering loops manually and mixing and matching set loops has been one of the places where I spent a lot of time on the Bento, and it's one of the most fun aspects of this machine's workflow. So you can start building things setting them up, make builds, make drops, have everything go away. How fun is that? It's all very reminiscent of launching clips in Ableton, and you can also resample Bento's internal sounds, so you could actually do a sort of SP404 workflow here, where you make scenes with multiple tracks and then resample them into a singular loop that you can play within a single looper track. And in that way, you could build out way bigger arrangements than just the initial 8 tracks we have here. The loops can also be recorded live and set to be played as the recording stops, so if you're a guitar player, this might be a powerful performance and composition tool as well. As for the sequencing itself on the device, I found it to be very capable, but a bit limited as far as this firmware version is concerned. Each sequence can be up to 256 steps long and can have up to 512 events per sequence. You can either live record stuff in or use the piano roll to add in notes, and the touchscreen works well here, as you can move around, you can pinch to zoom, you can add notes, you can erase notes, you can select notes, and thankfully there is an undo button. As of this firmware version, there isn't any step sequencing though. Each note can be set to a probability, but you don't get any parameter locks, step conditions, rolls, beat repeats, or anything you might see in something like an Electron box or on the much more expensive OPXY. So for example here, set the velocity, the length of the note, and the probability anywhere between 0 and always. Since I do have more powerful sequencers at hand, I tried hooking this up to my Oxy MK2 and using it as a sound module, which allows you to focus more on live performing the sound engines and tweak filters and live play notes. However, I did run into a few weird bugs and MIDI behaviors, like the stop and play buttons from my Oxy making the reverb on certain loops go to 100% for some reason. Finally, a word on CPU usage. On the MPC, Akai have done a great job of optimizing software and limiting certain functions like the number of certain CPU-hungry plugins to ensure the firmware runs smoothly on the entire range of devices with their different specs. 1010 have done something similar here with a few limitations like not being able to have more than one granular synth per project, or, for example, having a limit on the maximum samples available in the sample pool. However, I still feel that I'm able to tap the CPU's upper limits without necessarily doing anything too over the top. Like in this example, I have 6 instruments loaded. One is a granular, one's loops, one's a slicer, and these two are multi-samples. Now this one has 85 samples and this one has 123. If I launch the busiest part of my song, and let's say I'm gonna launch a few loops here, and I start playing around with the piano, look what happens to the CPU. Even though I don't have all the tracks assigned, it's still well over 90%. It reminds me a bit of the Native Instruments Machine Plus in that sense, and hopefully they can further optimize the unit so it handles the workload more efficiently. In the time I've had the Bento, it's had a ton of updates, including new features like synth engines and now the ability to save projects as WAV files on the horizon. Clearly, the 1010 Music team is putting a lot of effort into making this device all it can be, but I still think the platform has room to grow and mature, and it needs to. I've always believed in supporting innovation, especially when it comes to small companies with a track record like 1010, so I'm really rooting for them. I'll be following the development of the Bento down the line and making a final review in a few months, so I hope to see you there. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great week. I'll see you next time.